Okay, today we are talking about intervals. In a word, intervals are just the distance between two notes, but we need to name them with two terms. The first term is the distance, which will be just a number. So if we have a C to an E, that is a distance of 3. And you do that, you count that just by going 1, 2, 3. Something to remember here is that you have to count the note you start on as 1. And easy way to remember that is to think about if I said, what's the distance from a C to a C? That is a unison, or a 1, if you want to think of it that way. And then one step bigger from a C to a D would be a second. A third is a C to an E. A fourth is a C to an F, or all we're doing is counting the alphabet. It doesn't obviously have to start on C. So if I start on G, G, A, B, C, D, that will give me from G to D is a fifth. So the number is the first part, and we're going to call that the distance. So distance is just a matter of counting from one to the next. The distance from G to D is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we would say that it is a fifth from G to D. And these can go on up to, they can go past an octave if you want to. So you could say from a C down here to a D up here. C to C would be an eighth or an octave. Oct being the root word for 8. And then C to C is 8. C to D would be a 9. Some people would also call this a compound second, meaning C to D is a second. Compound means it's more than an octave. That's not terribly important right now, but it's a word that you may run into. The second part is quality. So that's what this part up here is. We have two classes of intervals, and those two classes have to be treated a little bit differently when you're talking about the interval. So the default name of an interval is either going to be perfect or major. And these will contain all of the intervals from the root of a major scale to all the notes above it. So from the root of a major scale to itself, let's talk about C major for this example. From a C to a C is a unison, and a unison is a perfect interval. These are perfect. And these are major, minor. Okay, from a C to a D is a major second. D, because D is in the C major scale, so C to D is a major second. From C to E is a major third. From C to F is a fourth, C perfect fourth. From C to G is a perfect fifth. From C to A is a major sixth, C to B is a major seventh, and then C to C is a perfect octave. If we don't always have notes from the root of a major scale, from the base of a major scale to the notes above it, sometimes you want to go from, say, the E in the major scale to the G. So if I want to know what is the interval from E to G, then I need to check. I can pretend that I'm in the key of E for just a second, and I can find out whether this note is a major third. This is a third E, F, G, 3. So is E to G a major third? And I would find that out by pretending I'm in the key of E and the E major scale. What kind of a G do you have in the E major scale? And I think you probably know by this point that that should be a G sharp to be major. But we don't have a G sharp. We have one half step smaller than G sharp. And that's what this table tells you. If you start with a major interval and you reduce it by a half step, so E to G sharp would be a major third. If we reduce that distance by bringing the top note down or making the interval smaller, then we have a minor third. Major made smaller by one half step becomes minor, and then made smaller again would be a diminished third. So E to G sharp is a major third, E to G natural is a minor third, and E to G flat is a diminished third. E to G sharp, again, is major. E to G double sharp would be augmented. Because we made E to G sharp, we made it bigger. You have to change that upper note to G double sharp in order to raise it. Some of you who haven't done this before are going to want to say E to G sharp is major, so if I want to make it bigger, I just go E to A. But as soon as you go E to A, you have changed. It's no longer a third. E to G sharp is a major third. E to G double sharp is an augmented third, and you can still see that it's a third here, 1, 2, 3. If you change it, instead of E to G double sharp, if you go E to A, now if you look at this one, you have changed the distance. It's no longer a third, now it is a fourth. So the trick to these intervals is you set your letters at the beginning and don't change your letters. Use accidentals in order to change the quality. So we have distance and we have quality is all this up here. A quick point to make is, well, let's look at this one. If I took, let's take a perfect interval and run through that one real quick. So C to G is a perfect fifth. And I know that because C, D, E, F, G tells me the distance is 5. And the interval is perfect because in the C scale, I have a G in the C major scale, which means this is a perfect fifth. This also outlines your triad, so if you can remember your major triad and your minor triad, those will also tell you the perfect fifth. If I want to make this bigger, I can take the top note and go to G sharp. Perfect interval made bigger becomes augmented right away. Perfect interval made smaller becomes diminished right away. We don't have major and minor on a fifth. Whenever you have a fifth, you're going to be talking about perfect, diminished, or augmented. And if you have one of these numbers, a third, a sixth, a seventh, or a second, say a seventh, major seventh, minor seventh, diminished seventh, when you make the major one smaller once and smaller twice. The only other thing I'd like to point out on these is if I have a perfect fifth and I want to make this interval smaller, we were just talking about I can take that C to G and I can lower the top note, making it C to G flat. But that's not the only way to make a perfect fifth C to G smaller. I can also take this bottom note and make it smaller. But in order to do that, the bottom note has to come up. C sharp to G is also a diminished fifth. All that we care about is this distance in between getting bigger or smaller. If it gets bigger, you go up on the chart. If it gets smaller, you go down on the chart. That's a quick introduction to intervals. Check out the attached worksheets, and I'll have a second video to talk to you about how to do calculating intervals on the worksheet, especially when they are below. The next video is going to talk about calculating intervals below, because that's a little bit trickier than above. Okay, see you soon.